Cemented as the foundation for our society, art maintains a very important influence on all of us. One of the most famous art movements, the Renaissance, shows us the shift towards a more humanistic point of view, with subjects dynamically posed in a realistic environment. In this interview, I will describe the sketches behind the detailed masterpieces that everyone knows and loves to this day. So the first concept that I would like to talk about in this presentation is expression and movement. Now, here in most of these preliminary drawings, you can see where the artist put in their own creative expression and shows the expression of the figures that they were sketching out and practicing. You can also see the dynamic movement. They really captured the motion of the figures in these preliminary sketches. You were able to plan out how you wanted, your figures to look, how you wanted them to feel or give off a certain feeling. And here in Michelangelo's studies for the Libyan Sibyl, you can see in this very nice looking red chalk, you can see how that twist in the body, he planned that out in a couple different ways. You can see in some small, kind of lighter sketching between the bigger figure and the head here and the hand, how he was kind of mapping out the composition of those, muscle turns and how the spine kind of curved and everything. And then you can also see how he changed the position or the perspective of the Sibyl's head. It really just was an experimentation of perspective for a lot of these preliminary drawings. When you go through so many sketches, you can really kind of carve out what you want to do for a finished piece by drawing, just pumping out tons of information onto paper. And then they also provided a lot of room to map out the details as well. So we can see kind of the realism that came from the Renaissance movement. And from this sketch, we then get the finished piece, which was the fresco painted in the Sistine Chapel. For our next concept, we have human anatomy, and human anatomy in these preliminary drawings also showed the very exaggerated muscle tone that we see in the Renaissance, from the humanism and the realism that all of these artists were going for. They probably only used male models, even though they would be drawing female figures. They were definitely mostly male. But if you look at all of these drawings here, it kind of showed the body mass and the proportion of a subject, and the artist could experiment how they wanted to show that. It also showed their own creative expression in that they weren't just using life drawings, they weren't just using life models to recreate these art pieces. They were also kind of learning how to draw people. And now a lot of the times they would be using cadavers for that as well, just to get muscle proportion and where the muscles were underneath the skin. And I know that Da Vinci used to kind of think of it as layer by layer, and do the muscles over the bone and then the skin over the muscles. And then from there you could also do a drapery study and how fabric falls over the body, over the skin, over the muscles, over the bone. It was very interesting, especially when they use pen and ink or the metal point, and you can really see the clear contour lines that they were working for and working towards when doing these preliminary drawings. Because instead of just getting all of the detail and the finished piece and the lighting and everything, you could really see how the artist focused on the position of the subject, how the realistic proportions kind of made these pieces so great. Moving on to the study for the Phrygian Sibyl by Raphael in 1511. Also red chalk on paper. A lot of these preliminary drawings really showed the contour lines and the idea of light and shadow, but it wasn't really the main focus like you would see in a painting. It was more to get an understanding of how they wanted their subject to look, how the light would fall on their faces or on the rest of their body, and also in the drapery study like we talked about in the human anatomy. You can see here, how the hand is positioned. Now, I'm sure in several other studies that Raphael did, he mapped out how he wanted that arm to look and how he wanted that right arm on the Sibyl to kind of twist in that motion. And a quote from a book that I read was, "Drawing is an art in which line predominates and modeling is suggested more by contour than by chiaroscuro." Now, chiaroscuro is the Renaissance kind of concept that came out during that time, where artists use a clear light and dark contrast. Very bold, definitely was an entire composition kind of mood setting, and you don't really see that in those preliminary drawings because they're just trying to capture the motion of the figure, how the figure sits, and it's really truly beautiful how they use these strong, confident lines to create these sketches, which should be seen as a work of art in themselves rather than just preliminary drawings or preparatory drawings. After having to do some of these kind of preparatory drawings myself, it's so interesting to be able to learn about the anatomy of these, of people, really, and kind of take your pencil and do that contour line. And I think that it's so beautiful to be able to take your pencil and create something on paper. I really enjoyed doing that. In conclusion, preliminary drawings are for mapping out proportion and body mass, testing perspectives, giving an idea of light and shadow, approaching the details in a closer view, and figuring out how to balance a composition. It is very important that we understand this is for the idealized figure of the Renaissance time period, where they had those exaggerated muscle tones and very strong, purposeful line work that created those contour drafts that we see from the old masters. And it is definitely a topic to be studied.